Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful creepy human being you. Welcome to my channel and welcome to today's true crime video. I'm so happy we could meet like this. I'm so happy that somehow in all of this that we're forced to deal with on the day-to-day, today you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or Bratterstein, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing Andrea Curry-Demus, the serial womb raider. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing the bell. I put out a new video every single week, sometimes 2 a week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. Alright, let's go ahead and get into this video. So this video is on a case that I came upon on newspapers.com while I was researching another case. Basically, when you look at newspapers.com, it brings up a page from a newspaper. Duh. And I was reading an article about one particular case, and an article next to it was about this case, and the headline grabbed me and compelled me to read further. I even ended up reading the headline to my husband, and he was like, oh, you should probably look into that. And if you know my husband, which none of you do, but you know what I've told you, it's that he has no interest in this, but even the headline grabbed him. And the headline was about Andrea Curry-Demus being a serial womb raider. And when I read that, I was like, what do you mean? What do you mean? Like Jennifer Lawrence on the episode of Hot Ones. And I was like, I gotta figure out what this is all about. And then I did, and I read all the things. And it is such a just crazy case. And it's really, really sad. And at the heart of it, it is about an obsessed woman. A woman who is obsessed with babies, who murdered an 18-year-old to steal hers. So today I'm going to tell you the entire story. I read all the things so that you do not have to. And at the end of this video, I want you to answer the question of the day. I'm going to give it to you now so you can have it kicking around in your brain as we go through the details. But of course, I want you to answer once you have something to go on. And the question of the day is this. Do you believe that Andrea Curry-Demus should have been found legally responsible for the murder she committed, for the crimes she committed? Or do you think due to her mental state, she should have been found not guilty? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below after we go through the details of this case. And now with all of that said, come gather around and let me tell you the story of Andrea Curry-Demus, the serial womb raider. Our story today begins on July 16th, 2008, and this is at West Penn Hospital in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It's on this day that a 38-year-old woman is brought into the hospital with a newborn, a super fresh, brand new newborn, still covered in newborn mess with the umbilical cord still attached. This woman was Andrea Curry-Demus, and she tells the hospital staff that she had given birth in her apartment alone, and that her family had come over after the birth, and when they saw her and they saw what had happened, they insisted that she go to the hospital. Now, right away, the hospital got some weird vibes from the situation, and one of the main things that made the bells start going off in their brains was the fact that they wanted to do an exam on Andrea, right? Because, hello, she had just given birth, and you can get all types of things can go wrong from the waist down when you give birth naturally. And Andrea was like, you know what, actually, no, I'm not going to be letting you do that. And that was already weird. But then after some, discussion and, pushing, she did allow them to give her a blood test. And it was through this blood test that by the next afternoon, the hospital was able to find that this baby could not have been hers because she had not given birth. There was no medical evidence to show that she had even been pregnant at any point recently. So they called the police. So police get there, they talk to the hospital staff, and they talk to Andrea's mother. Andrea's mother was there with her. Her name was Sharon. And they tell her, listen, we don't know what's going on. We don't know where she got this baby, but she did not give birth, and this is not her baby. And her mother, Sharon, dude, was shocked. She had no idea that her daughter had not given birth. She was under the impression she had been pregnant for months. She had showed her an ultrasound. They had had a baby shower for Andrea. Hell, Sharon had even talked to a doctor on the phone who told her she was going to be a grandmother. So now she's hearing all of that was bullshit. And so she's like, what is going on? And she goes to her daughter and she's like, what is going on? And this is when Andrea responds to her mother, quote, Mom, I bought a baby. So naturally, this information is relayed to police, and police go to Andrea and they want to talk to her, obviously, because you just can't go around buying babies. And so they're like, so can you please tell me exactly what happened here? And she said that she knew a local woman named Tina, who would hang out around her neighborhood, who was unfortunately addicted to crack and pregnant. And Andrea had had a miscarriage in June, and she had told Tina about this, and Tina, not being in a position to raise a kid, decided with Andrea that Andrea would buy the baby from her once the baby was born. You lost a baby, I have a baby I don't need. Win-win. Andrea tells police that like during that time, her and Tina had gotten pretty close. They had spent a good amount of time together, and that she had even bought Tina groceries out of the kindness of her heart. But then one day, Tina showed up at her house with a newborn, so she gave Tina $1,000 and she kept the baby. Now police hear this and they're like, this is an unbelievable story. They're not sure if they feel like she's being honest. So they go to her mom and they're like, do you think she bought a baby? And she's like, I don't fucking know, dude. Direct quote. Not really a direct quote, but they're also like, if this is true, that is hella illegal. So Andrea was arrested and she was charged with endangering a child and, quote, dealing in infant children, which is a charge and it is a misdemeanor. And she was held on a $10,000 bond and ordered to undergo a psychiatric exam. And as Andrea was being led out of the police station, there were reporters there, obviously, because this was a wild case. And she just said to them, quote, I didn't do nothing. And as I'm sure you can imagine, the local media like went wild with this story because like, what the fuck, this woman bought a baby? That's super weird. So police are focusing on trying to find this woman, Tina, because again, this is all super weird. So they go to the apartment complex on Ella Street where Andrea lived, and they searched what they believed at the time to be her apartment. We will get there soon, but they didn't find anything. That was until the next day. So on the evening of the 18th, so 2 days after Andrea showed up at the hospital with a baby that was not hers, police go back to the apartment complex where she lived. And they were going back because they were receiving reports of a really bad smell coming from one of the apartments. So bad that people outside of the building, on the street, like on the sidewalk, could smell it and see flies. So police get there and they go to another apartment, not the one that they had checked the day before. They went to Andrea's actual apartment. Turns out the apartment they had went to the day before was Andrea's sister Brooke's apartment. So, turns out Andrea and Brooke lived in the same apartment complex. So when police showed up at the apartments the day before, wanting to search Andrea's apartment, Brooke met up with them and was like, right this way, officers, and led them to her apartment. Now this was a problem, and they did look into her and considered actually charging Brooke for doing this, but it didn't end up happening. It turned out she didn't know anything about what happened and just lied to help her sister because she didn't know what was going on. And in the end, she ended up testifying against her sister anyway. But that's why when police went the day before, they didn't find anything because they didn't even go to Andrea's apartment. But either way, now police are in Andrea's apartment and they immediately know that something is wrong here because there's a bad smell, a really gnarly smell, and police are familiar with the smell. Well, not all of them, I'm sure not all of them, but they've all heard that the smell of decomp is not a good time. So when they walk in there and they smell all that, they know they're in for something bad, but they could not have been prepared for what they were going to find because in Andrea's room, stuffed in the hollow space between her bed and her headboard, police found a body. The body was lying face down, the wrists and the ankles were bound, and her body was wrapped in plastic, garbage bags, and a comforter, and the head was wrapped tightly with plastic and duct tape. When the body was removed, it was clear that it had been there a little while. There was a moderate amount of decomposition, so it had at least been there a couple of days. And after being examined, they were able to tell that this was the body of a young woman and that she had been eviscerated with a, quote, sharp instrument. Very sharp instrument. And what that means, what evisceration means, is that her abdomen had been cut open and tissue and organs had been removed and her uterus was cut into in what one county coroner called an obvious attempt to steal her baby, because it was clear that this woman had been pregnant, but the baby was gone and the placenta was still there. Now, even though it seems pretty obvious that this body with the cut open abdomen and missing baby is more than likely the mother of the baby that Andrea showed up with that isn't hers, with the, one of the county coroners saying like there can't be too many of similar cases like this happening at the same time in the same area, they still had to do tests to confirm. They couldn't just come out and be like, this is what happened, this is what this is. They had to do tests to confirm. They were also doing tests to see if this woman had been drugged, because drugs were found in the apartment and there wasn't really much sign of a struggle, and like anyone in the right mind would have struggled like hell if Andrea was trying to do what she was trying to do. So they believed that Andrea had drugged this woman to subdue her, to make it easier for her to do what she was set out to do, and it turns out they were right. This woman had been drugged. Initially, police were operating under the assumption that this body was that of a woman named Tina, and they even ended up testing this woman's fingerprints against the fingerprints, or it might have been the DNA. Basically, they tested her against another woman. Why can't I speak? Her name was Tina Carter. They tested her to see if this woman was Tina Carter because she had been missing, and it turns out she wasn't. And there were also the families of 2 missing pregnant women who came forward thinking that the woman found in the headboard might be their loved ones, but when they were tested, it turned out that it was not the case, and they couldn't figure out who this was because this person's fingerprints didn't come up in any database that would show that she had been like arrested before or anything like that. And she also didn't have any like identifying tattoos or scars to help them know which direction to go in. My baby likes to rip these off the wall, so now they don't stick that well. Stay. You got this. I'll fix you later. Anyways, sorry about that. In looking into what Andrea had been doing in the days leading up to all of this happening, they were able to narrow down their search because they were able to determine that Andrea had been in contact with an 18-year-old pregnant woman named Kia Johnson. And Kia Johnson had gone missing. She had been missing since the 15th, which was the day before Andrea gave birth. Now, they couldn't immediately confirm that this was Kia, but despite that, her family did come out and make a statement saying that they did believe that it was her, that Kia had gone missing after going to visit her boyfriend in jail, and that she was due to give birth just weeks later on July 30th. And unfortunately, it turned out that they were right. Through dental records and also from the clothing that the body was found wearing, they were able to determine that the woman who was stuffed behind Andrea's bed in that headboard area was 18-year-old Kia Johnson. And police believed that Andrea had lured her to her apartment so that she could harvest her baby. And in investigating Andrea further, they found that this was not the first time she had tried to do something like this. Now, let's talk about Kia for a little bit, and then we'll get into what police believe happened here and how the two, cross paths and go from there. Kia Johnson was one of 5 children with 3 brothers and 1 sister born to parents Eric and Darlene. And she was said to be a fantastic daughter, like the type of daughter you would be proud to have. She was mature for her age, she was kind and generous, and she was the type of person who used her free time as like a young teenage person helping other people. She worked as a candy striper at the hospital and also used her time feeding the homeless when she volunteered with her father at the Salvation Army. She was a spiritual girl, dedicating her life to God just a week before she was murdered, and the captain of the Salvation Army, where she would volunteer, said that he remembered singing and praying with Kia the Sunday before she was killed and said of her, quote, "Kia understood that she needed God's grace." She was also said to be friendly, right? Like the type of person who could make friends with people anywhere she went and believed that everyone was her friend. She was the type of person who just saw the good in people, even if maybe they didn't deserve it. And Kia's uncle, his name was Kias, I believe, Kias. She was actually named after him, which what an honor. I can't imagine how special that was for him. But he said that Kia had a way of making people feel like they were at home with her, and that was actually perhaps her downfall, is, thinking everyone was good and everyone had good intentions. Kia spent some time living with her grandmother and a bit in Washington before moving back in with her father, but shortly before her death, she moved out of her dad's place and into her own apartment because she was pregnant and wanted her own place to raise her baby. She was really excited to be a mom and anxiously awaiting the birth of her child, which was coming soon because she was 36 weeks pregnant. She was getting everything ready and getting everything she needed for her son because she wanted it all to be perfect when he arrived. And this seems to be how she ended up in Andrea's apartment. So Andrea and Kia were believed to have met at the Allegheny County Jail in July of 2008. And they were both there to meet with their partners who were incarcerated. Kia's was the father of her baby who was in jail, I believe, for burglary and robbery. And Andrea was there to visit her husband, who was in jail with accusations of rape. The repeated rape of a child. I guess one of his ex-girlfriends, this girlfriend's daughter. He was accused of raping her over and over, like the entire time he knew her. Which is, I don't even have words. I literally don't even have words. It could make me fucking rage. But apparently, he hadn't been in jail long. He had been out of jail when Andrea became, pregnant, and was arrested, I believe, either right before or right after her baby shower. So the two women were there, they met each other, and they started bonding over their, shared experience of pregnancy, because Andrea was pretending to be pregnant. Which, speaking of which, let's talk about what Andrea was doing here, which again, was faking a pregnancy. But let's go back a little bit. So, in 2007, this was November of 2007, Andrea thought that she may be pregnant. So she, went to a doctor's office to take a urine test to, find out if this was the case. And she had to leave and wait for a phone call. They were going to call her, which is weird because I've taken a urine pregnancy test at the doctor's office and they usually let you know, like right away. Don't know why it was going to require a phone call from Andrea, but she went to the doctor. She took the urine test. She went home to wait for the phone call to get the results. And when that call came in, like the day that call came in, she was with her mother, Sharon. So the doctor calls and she tells her that the urine test had came back as positive. But the doctor also told her in that breath that urine tests coming back positive and being a false positive was a common thing. So they needed her to come in and take a blood test to confirm that she was actually pregnant. But all Andrea heard in that moment was, this urine test is positive, or all she chose to hear in that moment was, this urine test is positive, and was like jumping with joy at being pregnant, and was talking to the doctor and was like, can you please tell my mom? And then gave the phone to her mother, Sharon, and the doctor told her, like, your daughter is pregnant, you're going to be a grandmother. But they don't remember what the doctor's name was who relayed this information. And her mother said of this time, quote, we rubbed her belly, her eyes lit up. Sharon said from that moment on, all Andrea did was talk about and plan for this baby. Like, the pregnancy was all she wanted to talk about. The baby was all she wanted to talk about. And they were excited. They were like, okay, a baby's coming. This was going to be Sharon's first grandbaby. So they started taking measures, planning for a baby coming into their lives, planning a baby shower, all that jazz. And everything seemed normal. The baby was said to be due at the end of June, which would have been just weeks before Kia was murdered. Andrea even showed her family an ultrasound. She had an ultrasound photo of her baby that her mom took and put up on the refrigerator, and didn't even notice in her excitement that the font that Andrea's name was written in was different than all the other font on this ultrasound. Which, I don't know if I would notice that. She was just so excited. She was so excited this was going to be her very first grandbaby. She said she was very, very, very happy, and said that she described like the feeling of learning they were going to have a new baby in the household as her being on cloud 9. But as time went on, things started to kind of spiral out of control for Andrea. She had told her mother that the doctors planned to induce her pregnancy at the end of June. I don't know why she would have said that they were planning to induce her, maybe due to her age, since technically she would have had a geriatric pregnancy since she was over 35. But either way, she was supposed to be induced at the end of June. That time came and passed. That date came and went. We're past that date, and Andrea tells her mom that something was wrong. But in reality, what had happened is that, you remember how the doctor told Andrea to come into the hospital and take a blood test to find out if she was really pregnant? Well, she had. She had went in, she had taken the blood test, and she had found out that it was negative. But she just didn't tell anybody about this. She kept this information to herself and let everybody believe that she was pregnant, even wearing like a fake stomach. Like, man, I truly don't get how you do something like this. You get an ultrasound that's not yours, you put your name on it, you wear a fake belly, you have a baby shower with your friends and family, and you set up a nursery, and you do all this knowing full well that you're not pregnant. So now let's move forward to July 15th, which was the last day that Kia was seen alive. It was on this day that Sharon had left her daughter. They'd been spending a lot of time together. She lived pretty close by. Sharon had left her daughter because she was going to go do her job as a nurse's aide. And while she was at work doing her job, she received a call from Andrea saying that she was getting contractions. So she left and went to Andrea's house. And this would have been sometime in the evening, because her shift was from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. and she had left work early to go and see that her daughter was okay. So she was there with Andrea, and Andrea's sister Brooke was there, and they stayed with her till about 11 p.m. So she got there sometime between 7 and 11. She went to work at 7, left early, went to Andrea's, left at 11 p.m. So she gets there. She's with Brooke. They stay until 11 p.m. And then they're like, okay, Andrea's fine. She doesn't seem to be like in, intense labor. So they left, and Brooke walked Sharon back to her apartment, which was not far, and then went back to her apartment, which is in the same apartment complex as Andrea. The next morning, Andrea calls Brooke and Sharon to tell them that the night before, she had given birth to a baby in that apartment. And so obviously they want to rush over, and Brooke is the first one to get there since they're literal neighbors. And Brooke did say that Andrea was being a bit weird, that she kept going into the bedroom, closing the door, and staying in there a while and then coming out. But it was in that bedroom that she emerged with a newborn baby. So Sharon, Andrea's mother, shows up, and immediately she's like, something needs to happen here, because she sees that there's like blood on Andrea, there's blood on Brooke, there's blood in the bathroom, and she's like, we need to call 911. You need to go to a hospital. And Brooke tells her like that they had already called the ambulance and that nobody showed up. I cannot confirm if that is true, but that's what she said. So Sharon's like, okay, and called 911 again. She then got to sit there and like take in the scene in front of her, which was her daughter sitting on the couch holding this newborn little baby. And she said that the baby was beautiful. So that's the high she's on. And then she goes to the hospital with her daughter. They find out this baby isn't even hers. The cops get called, and then they find Kia's body in Andrea's apartment, murdered. Now, let's talk about what police believe really happened, and it all starts with the jail, with the two women being at the jail at the same time. Kia visiting the father of her baby, her boyfriend, and Andrea being there visiting her husband. So Andrea and Kia had seen each other there on multiple occasions prior to this day, and eventually, the socialization led to a bit of a friendship. Obviously, it wasn't a real friendship because you don't do this to your friends, but a perceived friendship, right? The two would socialize. Occasionally, Andrea would buy Kia groceries, and they would even go to like this local hot dog spot. They went together there a couple of times. And police believe that it was this friendship, this perceived friendship, that made it so that Kia felt comfortable going home with Andrea that day from the jail to go pick up clothing from Andrea to Kia, like little baby clothes for her son, with the promise that she would give her a ride home afterwards. But instead, Andrea got Kia to her apartment. She drugged her, she bound her with tape, and she cut the baby from her body while she was still alive. Andrea then wrapped her in plastic, wrapped her in trash bags and tape, and then put her in a comforter and put her in that space between her bed and the wall. But the thing that's really fucked up about this is that Kia was likely still alive when all of this happened, because her cause of death was listed as a combination of blood loss and suffocation from the bag being taped over her face. And they believe this. They believe that she was alive when all of this happened, because if Andrea had put the bag over Kia's face and taped it up while the baby was still inside of her and Kia had died, the baby would have a very limited amount of time to live inside the body with Kia dead. Like, the window of opportunity is very small. So they believe that she took the baby and then killed her. Now, all of this was shocking. To come upon Kia and find her in this way was intense, because nobody was expecting this outcome. Not even her family. They could not, they had no idea that something like this could have happened to her. Her mother, Darlene, said that she had no idea in her mind that Kia being missing meant that something terrible had happened to her. And she said of this, quote, "My last thought was that they would find her the way she was." Now, Darlene didn't live in the area, so she had to come up to this area with Kia's sister to learn that her daughter was dead. And then after the autopsy was confirmed, she had to learn how her daughter had died. And I cannot imagine getting that information, to learn that your daughter had died from blood loss and suffocation from her baby being stolen from her. That seems like, it doesn't even seem real. You know what I mean? I feel like my brain wouldn't compute something like this, but this was her reality. Kia's cousin said that her death was unfathomable, and said that just the fact that they know that she suffered so much makes them sick, especially because they know that she would have trusted Andrea. Like, she would not have been the type to like go off with some man, you know what I mean? Like, she would have only gone off with a woman who she felt comfortable with, a woman who was, you know, also pregnant, because she would have been so excited to be able to talk to somebody about this shared experience and about her excitement for having her baby. But as we know, Andrea wasn't pregnant. She was a liar who had planned this, who had seemingly like planned this murder out. She went out of her way to get gabapentin, which is a strong anticonvulsant medication that apparently she used to drug Kia. She got that ultrasound, and then she murdered her and then came up with a bunch of stories to try to hide what she did. Speaking of which, speaking of these different stories, once Kia's body was found in Andrea's apartment, the police went back to her. Because remember, she was arrested for child endangerment and dealing with children, right? Selling kids. And they go to her and they're like, hey, so if you bought this baby from a woman named Tina, then why did we just find the body of a formerly pregnant 18-year-old murdered in your apartment with her baby stolen? Like, can you explain that for me, please? And apparently Andrea just said that she didn't know this woman had died. And then she told them that she didn't know Kia, but her fingerprints would likely be on the plastic and the duct tape used to bound her. So that's something. She also then gave them a whole new story about what happened here. She told police that 2 people showed up at her house with a pregnant woman. They removed the baby from this woman and gave it to her, and she was just like, okay, I guess I'm this kid's mom. She literally said that after she miscarried, she told a friend about this, and her friend was like, bet, I'm gonna get you a baby. She said then on July 15th, this friend and a man showed up with a dark-skinned black woman who was pregnant. She says the man gave this woman pills and then left. She said the next morning he returned to the house. He took this woman, this pregnant woman, into the bathroom along with a blanket, plastic, and duct tape, and then closed the door. She said through the door she could hear moaning, and then this guy came out with a baby, handed it to her, and was like, this is yours. This is the story she's telling police to explain why there's a dead body in her house. Now, obviously, police do not believe her, so she is promptly arrested. Well, she was already arrested, but they gave her a whole new list of charges that included unlawful restraint, kidnapping, and criminal homicide. And criminal homicide is a broad charge that covers a variety of murder or manslaughter counts, and it's kind of a placeholder while information is gathered, and the charges usually get like more specific. And after she was arrested, she was actually put in a state mental hospital while the judge determined whether or not she was competent to stand trial. Now, the reaction to Andrea being arrested and people finding out that she had done this and that she had never been pregnant, it was shocking for most people because everyone who knew her was like, this woman's been pregnant for months. And her friend Ivy said of this quote, I went to the baby shower and her wedding. I had no idea something like this could happen. I'm totally shocked, and she was so nice and kind. It's just unbelievable. But not everyone was shocked. Apparently, Andrea's sister-in-law, her name was Stephanie, she had always been kind of skeptical about Andrea's pregnancy and thought that it was weird. She was like, okay, she would waddle around Andrea. She would waddle around and make calls that were seemingly to be making doctor's appointments, and she would make sure to do this in front of family and in front of her husband. Okay, she would do this, but Stephanie always felt like there was a little bit of weirdness around Andrea and how she acted with this pregnancy. Like, for example, one of the examples she gave is that Andrea would never let anyone touch her stomach. And to Stephanie, this was weird, which, okay, when I was pregnant, I wasn't like huge on people touching my stomach either, because it's like, just don't touch me, because like I'm a person, not just a receptacle for this baby. But this is something that Stephanie found to be strange because in her experience, most women are so excited to be pregnant that they're excited to show it off, and they're cool with people like touching them. Or at least they don't say anything when people do it. But she said she was particularly convinced that this wasn't a real pregnancy when at Andrea's baby shower, she was finally able to touch Andrea's stomach. And she says, I don't know why she did this, probably because she was like, this bitch isn't really pregnant. But she says that she like pinched Andrea on the stomach when Andrea was looking, and that Andrea had no reaction. She said from that point, she was convinced that Andrea wasn't pregnant, and she wasn't quiet about it. She would tell family members like, I don't think she's really pregnant. What should we do about this? But nobody really took her seriously. But the word about Stephanie being skeptical did get back to Andrea, and Andrea would like go out of her way to try to convince Stephanie that she was pregnant. And she said that even the day that Andrea went into labor, she made sure to call Stephanie to tell her, and Stephanie believes this was so that she could be like, aha, see, I am pregnant, I'm having the baby now. But all Stephanie noticed on this phone call was how Andrea seemed strangely calm for a woman who was in labor. Anyways, Stephanie was actually the person who informed Andrea's husband that Andrea was not really pregnant and had since been arrested, and told him like what she was arrested for. And she also made sure to tell him some information that had come into the light. A light had been shown on Andrea's past, and that was that she had a past experience, a past history of trying to steal people's babies. And when she told Andrea's husband this, he was like, what the actual fuck? Because he had no idea about any of this. Now, bro, let's get into Andrea's history a little bit. So we're now going to go back to when I was a wee lass. This was at the end of 1989 to the beginning of 1990. And this is when a 20 to 21-year-old Andrea became pregnant, found out she was pregnant. Or so she says. I haven't found any records online that show that she was ever actually pregnant, just reports of her saying that she had been pregnant and that she had experienced miscarriages and that she also had a baby that died of SIDS. Now, I can see somebody looking at this particular account and believing that she was pregnant at this time because, I mean, she was so young. She was only like 20 or 21. Why would she already be lying about being pregnant and things like that? But considering something that she does around this time, which is why we're talking about it right now, I don't think it's a far stretch. I don't need to stretch before I take the leap that she may have been lying about this pregnancy as well, but I don't know for sure. But the point is, she's saying she's pregnant and she's reportedly super excited about it. Apparently, a woman who was friends with her at this time in late 1989 was also pregnant at the same time that Andrea was said to be pregnant. And she said that Andrea was so stoked and went out and bought like everything somebody would need if they were going to have a baby. She had like pacifiers and lotions and sleepers and stuffed animals and clothes for both boys and girls. Her friend said that she had never seen this much stuff for any baby except in a store. It's like she was going overboard. But anyways, she's excited she has all this stuff. But reportedly, she had a miscarriage in early 1990. And if that did happen, that is horrible. That's horrible. I feel so bad for anyone who has experienced that. Anyone who's experienced any of the stuff that Andrea says happened to her, I have sympathy for. But if this did happen to Andrea, she definitely handled these negative emotions around it in an unproductive way, to say the least. So, it was May of 1990 when Andrea became friends with a woman from Wilkenburg who had just given birth to a little baby. And one day, Andrea just randomly attacked this woman with a knife and tried to steal her baby. Luckily, this woman's husband was able to intervene and stop the attack, and Andrea fled. So, she's in the wind. But the next day, the very next day, Andrea goes to the hospital. It was the Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh. And while there, she befriends a woman. Well, not really a woman. She was a 16-year-old girl who had brought her brand new baby. This baby was only 3 weeks old, a little girl named Shaquela. Okay, she brought her in to be treated for meningitis. And when this girl, the 16-year-old girl, the mother of this baby, left the hospital, she left, she dropped off the baby had to stay, she left. Andrea took this baby and left the hospital and went to her house. She kidnapped this baby. Now, I have no idea how people knew who Andrea was or how they were able to track her down, but they were able to, and the next day they found this baby unharmed in Andrea's apartment. Thankfully, completely, fine, but still kidnapped. So she was arrested, obviously, and they ended up putting her at this time in a mental health facility as well, because they were like, somebody in their right mind isn't going to do something like this. So while she was in the hospital, she was evaluated, and she was said to have been found to have lower than average intelligence, with her attorney saying she was mentally slow. And they also said that she suffered from severe depression, personality disorders, and they said that she was obsessed with getting an infant, that she spent a lot of time thinking about her past miscarriages, and that she suffered from auditory hallucinations. Like, she would sit there and hear the sounds of babies crying. And her attorney at this time said of Andrea, and I quote, "I don't recall that she actually understood the ramifications of what she was doing." Ultimately, in 1991, she ended up pleading guilty to a variety of charges related to these two crimes that included kidnapping, hiding or concealing the whereabouts of a child, and aggravated assault. And she was sentenced to between 3 and 10 years for these crimes and ended up serving between 7 and 8 years. So she was paroled in August of 1998, and from there I don't think she ended up getting a job. She just lived off of welfare and supplemental security income benefits for her mental health issues, and she just kind of floated around. She moved around to several different places and had a string of toxic and mutually abusive relationships. Now, Andrea never did go on to have her own children. At a time, she did end up being like the caretaker for 2 of her nieces, but I don't know what happened to the other one, but I know one was taken away by Children, Youth, and Families because she had like terrible behavioral issues, but this was Andrea's only real, toe dip into actually like mothering. She also had her fair share of issues, like little run-ins with the law. Like in 2004, she got caught stealing a bunch of like leather jackets from a store that ended up accounting to a couple of $100s. And then a couple years later, she got caught stealing a bunch of like purses from Marshalls. And because of this, she ended up just getting probation. Like she didn't have any serious things, just kind of shoplifting here and there. And again, she was given probation and agreed to seek help for her mental health, alcohol, and drug problems, and said that she'd take the medication prescribed to her by her psychiatrist and meet with her probation officer monthly. Like that was what she was ordered to do when she got in trouble for these particular things. But obviously none of these attempts to help her did much good because look where we are now. So anyways, Andrea is in the hospital and she's being kept there until she's brought to a point where she's, competent to stand trial. And in the meantime, life moves on, right? Like Kia's family life has to move on. And her baby who survived this attack, whose name is out there, but I'm not going to give his full name. He goes by his middle name, which is Kian. The middle name was given to him after his mother. He was apparently doing well, though when he was first rescued from Andrea, he did suffer from low heart rate and low body temperature due to blood loss from when he was, taken from his mother's womb. I believe when he was saved, he was initially put into the custody of welfare workers before being released to Kia's family. Now, who he's with now, I'm not sure. I know that at a time he was with Darlene, Kia's mom, and at a time he was with Darlene's dad. They were divorced by this point, but I know in 2009 he was living with Kia's father, Eric, and he was like raising the baby. Like that's the latest report. As of 2009, he was with Eric. Eric was raising the baby because remember the baby's father was in jail, serving 5 to 10 years for robbery. So time had marched on, and his daughter, Eric's daughter's killer, hadn't even gone to trial yet, but he's sitting there having to plan a first birthday party for his grandson who no longer has a mother. And he was doing his best to make this like, a happy and loving occasion with like a cake and maybe a clown. But you have to remember that, yes, this is this baby's first birthday, but it's also the anniversary of his daughter's murder, who hasn't even gotten justice yet. And man, this has already been like so hard on her family. Her father ended up having to leave his job. He worked in customer service, but he found that he couldn't even like function normally anymore. He couldn't sleep, and he often found himself sitting outside at night just kind of waiting for his daughter to come home. He said that losing her took like the entire world out of him, but he did acknowledge that having Key and having the baby did kind of take the edge off the pain, at least a little bit. And he said of this baby boy, and I quote, "He's the happiest little baby. He laughs all the time. There ain't nothing but Jesus flowing through him. I just thank God we have him." So he does this. He arranges a first birthday party for his grandson. But prior to doing this, he has to arrange a funeral for his daughter. The funeral took place at the Trinity Church of God in Christ, with the urn containing Kia's ashes alongside flower arrangements that said, quote, "Mommy, sister, and daughter" in the front. And more than 150 people attended. Even half a dozen pastors from different churches came to lend their support. The reverend at her funeral said that like this was a terrible thing and that there was no denying that, and that he could understand why people would now be questioning God. Like, how could a just God let something like this happen? And he just said to like the congregation, the people that were there, that no one could touch Kia now. Her mother, who at this funeral was wearing a t-shirt with a photo of Kia on it, said that Kia was just such a special child, such a special person, and was going to be missed by everyone who knew her. Now, during the funeral, Darlene and Eric, Kia's parents, said that they did forgive Andrea, because she had at least brought the baby to the hospital. And if she hadn't done that, they might not have him either. But as time went on, Eric seemed to change his tune a little bit. And in later interviews, he's like, man, like, I know we're supposed to forgive, but like, fucking wow. And he said of this, quote, I feel that why should she get to breathe air and live life? I've got to wake up every day and hold my daughter in an urn. I kiss that urn every day. It's the only thing I got left. That and my grandson. And he keeps that urn, it's a blue urn with like butterflies on it, on a shelf next to a framed photo of Jesus in his home. And he keeps some ashes on him in this angel pendant that he wears. And he said of losing his daughter, quote, they say God does everything for a reason. Maybe God needed another angel. That's how I look at that, because that's the only place she could have went. Which, man, is so heartbreaking. And speaking of heartbreaking, this poor family, I can't even, this isn't related to this case, but it is related to this family, because when I was reading about Kia's murder, I read that years later in 2016, Kia's brother Eric Jr., named after his father, was also murdered. Apparently he was shot just in front of his home. And from what I can see, this hasn't been solved. I cannot imagine losing your daughter to murder, having to come to terms with that, and then years later having another one of your children murdered. I cannot imagine what this family must go through every single day because they lost their kids to violence like this. But to move forward with Kia's case, we'll get into the legal part of this. It took a little bit for Andrea to be deemed competent to stand trial, but eventually she was, and they were able to move forward. Now, the defense did not agree with the judge's evaluation or determination of Andrea's competency. They said that they did not believe she was competent to stand trial. They did not believe that she'd be able to assist in her own defense. And they said that in the times that they had met with her while she had been in the hospital getting competent, they had had trouble communicating with her, and she had been diagnosed as having paranoid schizophrenia. Their doctor also said that Andrea had not been able to give a coherent account of what she was charged with and was a danger to herself. They said that she had denied having the auditory hallucinations, but did appear to be responding to, quote, internal stimuli, and they believed overall, quote, her judgment was psychologically impaired and a bit obsessed. Which that end part doesn't seem to be something that was up for debate at all, because both the prosecution and the defense agree that Andrea seems to be obsessed with babies. That's just like, duh. Now, we don't see this that often in like murder cases, right? Like very serious, real boom cases, or at least not ones that I have covered personally on this channel. But Andrea's case actually ended up being a non-jury trial, which means instead of the prosecution, the defense presenting their case to a jury, it was just going to be one judge. And this was done per Andrea's request. Apparently they initially were going to have a jury trial, and they had even selected a couple of jurors, but at the last minute, Andrea changed her mind and wanted just a judge. Now, this isn't just a decision you can make. You have to convince the judge that you understand the rights you are waiving, because you have a right to a jury trial, because it's in your benefit to do so. So she had to, well, it can be in your benefit to do so, right? It's considered beneficial to you to have a jury. So you have to convince the judge that you understand the rights that you are waiving. And she said that, yes, she did understand that, despite the medications she was on, which she said were 7 different pills and a, quote, shot in the butt. And she also told the judge that she was intelligent enough to make this decision, saying that, you know, she had graduated from high school, though she did hesitate when she was asked if, like, she could read and write and understand English, but eventually she said she could. And when asked if she understood the charges against her, she said yes, homicide. In the prosecution's opening statement, they said that Andrea should not be exempt from a first-degree murder charge because she knew what she was doing was wrong at the time that she did it. They said the fact that she was mentally ill did not mean that she was not legally responsible for what she did at the time that she did it. The prosecution told the judge about Andrea's past, which was something to behold, and they used this as evidence that Andrea knew what she was doing and was guilty of planning to kill Kia because she knew she had to. She knew she could not leave this mother alive, because last time she had left a mother alive, and this mother had testified against her at trial and put her in jail. And the prosecution said of this, quote, there was only one way out of this. Andrea Curry-Demus gets a baby. Kia Johnson is gone forever. The prosecution said that Andrea had carefully constructed this web much like a spider, and said that this was a web of death and Kia was the butterfly. He then said that Andrea made a point to wrap Kia's head in plastic and duct tape, which showed that she was trying to kill her, and she had wrapped her head in this so tight that death would have likely come, or at least unconsciousness, in just 90 seconds. And he said that this screamed premeditation. He added that Kia was such a good kid, and this was a perfect example of how you need to be careful who your friends are. The DA then presented items that had been recovered from Andrea's apartment, like bloody knives, a bloody roll of plastic wrap, and duct tape. They also showed a pair of blue jeans that had belonged to Kia that were stuffed down into the bottom of Andrea's hamper, and at the bottom of them, at the ankle, there was still duct tape attached. They also showed photos of Andrea's apartment with blood everywhere. There were bloody pillows. There was blood all over the bed set. There was a bloody bathroom. They showed a photo of a blue and white bassinet that was just sitting there waiting for a baby that Andrea wasn't pregnant with. And they showed photos of Kia wearing just the red and white striped shirt that she was last seen wearing, wrapped in all of this shit, this plastic and this bread spread, and stuffed in that hollow space behind Andrea's bed. And Kia's family had been there through the trial. They had sat there and listened to all of the testimony, but when they started talking about Kia and how she was found, they had to leave the room. The defense, of course, told the court that Andrea was not guilty by reason of insanity, and said they would prove that she, quote, was operating under severe psychosis when she cut the baby from the womb. They described Andrea as a woman who'd suffered from delusions and other mental health disorders for years. One of the main delusions Andrea was described as suffering from was that she believed she had experienced a number of pregnancies and miscarriages. Andrea believed that she had been pregnant at 12 and miscarried at 4 months, and was again pregnant at the age of 21, but miscarried again. And the second, quote, miscarriage was right before that attempted kidnapping that landed her in jail. Her attorney said that Andrea had a, quote, break from reality, and that her method of retrieving this baby was evidence of her severe psychosis. And then the doctor for the defense said, quote, as a result of her underlying psychosis, she is unable to appreciate between right and wrong. I think it's likely she was psychotic. It's the sum total of 20 years of psychotic behavior and the bizarre act of the crime itself. However, another doctor testified that this was not the case. They said that Andrea lies when it's convenient for her, and said that she has an antisocial personality disorder, which means she believes she's above the law. The doctor said that nothing indicates that Andrea had a break from reality when she killed Kia. She had gone through way too many steps to plan this murder. She faked a pregnancy. She befriended a pregnant woman. She got her to come to her house. She got the drugs to sedate her. She fucking committed the murder, and then made many attempts, different stories to hide what she did. And the prosecutor said of this, and I quote, the plan she put together in this case wasn't the best plan in the world, but it was a plan. Make no mistake. They also added, to hear these steps that this woman took, to a normal person, you must think when you hear this, like, wow, this woman must be crazy. But he said of this, quote, being crazy, doing something insane, does not mean you're not criminally responsible. And then the DA asked the judge to find Andrea guilty but mentally ill, which would mean that after she was found guilty, she would go to a mental health facility to undergo treatment, and once she was found to be mentally stable, she'd then go to prison to serve out her life sentence. If she was given life, which is what they wanted, obviously. Ultimately, Andrea Curry-Demus was found guilty of second-degree murder, and she was given the mandatory, which was life in prison. She was also given an additional 10 to 20 years for the kidnapping, but she was found to be mentally ill, which means she is going to be sent to a state hospital, or she was going to be sent to a state hospital, which I believe was the Muncie State Hospital, to be, helped, treated, and once she's found to be mentally stable, she will be sent to a prison to serve out the rest of her sentence. Now, during her sentencing, Andrea did apologize to the family, very simply that. She turned to the family briefly and said, I want to apologize to the family, and then turned to the judge and was like, I'm sorry. And the judge said to her in that moment, I'm not convinced you understand what you're saying right now. Now, the prosecution had been asking for a first-degree murder conviction, though I don't know how that would have affected the sentencing since she has to be in there for life anyway. But the judge ultimately did not feel convinced that due to Andrea's delusions, she had the ability to form intent, which you need for first-degree murder. But that doesn't mean that the judge went easy on her or felt sympathy for her at all. The judge actually said to Andrea, quote, "There must be few crimes as indescribably brutal and vicious to entice and entrap a pregnant teenager, to paralyze her with a drug, to slice an infant from her womb while she writhed in agony, then to methodically mummify her head in plastic and duct tape, depriving her of breath, life, and the opportunity to be a mother so that the defendant could proclaim her own maternity." The judge then added that it would be a huge injustice if Andrea was ever to be released into the public again, and said that the sentence that she was given, the mandatory sentence she was given of life in prison, may be a more merciful sentence than she deserves. Kia's mother said that Andrea was cold, that she had to have ice running through her veins and had to be a monster to do what she did. But she did say that she supported the life sentence for Andrea, and she actually said of this quote, "I know my daughter's soul will be at rest now, knowing she will be punished for this heinous, senseless crime. I don't want her to have the death penalty. I want her to suffer. I really do. I want her to suffer and think about what she did to my daughter and see my daughter's face every day that she wakes up. I don't want her to die. It's too easy." But, the whole family didn't seem to agree because Kia's uncle did say that he believed Andrea should have been put to death. Now, as for the defense, they also, they were not happy with this outcome. Obviously, it wasn't what they wanted. They said that Andrea was now on medication that she wasn't on at the time of the murder, and that she now felt remorse for what she had done. And of course, they did say that they planned to appeal. Her attorney planned to argue the, quote, weight of the evidence, basically arguing the fact that the prosecution had not proven that Andrea was sane at the time the murder was committed, which I actually don't believe it is their responsibility. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think if you come to court trying to say that your client's not guilty by reason of insanity, you have the burden of proof to prove that they were insane at the time. I believe, I could be wrong, let me know, but that was what they were going to attempt. But the DA, of course, disagrees. They believe that at some point in the hospital, Andrea will be gotten back on track, be, brought to mental health, some form of mental health, and that she'll then have to come to terms with what she's done. But as of today, I don't see that any appeal has been filed. I actually don't see any new articles on this case since 2010. So I don't know if she's still in the hospital. I don't know if she's been moved to a state prison. But what I do know is that no matter where she is, she's going to be locked up for the rest of her life. And with her history, I honestly think that that's probably for the best. And with that, my friends, is the story of the tragic murder of Kia Johnson. I hope you found this case to be informative. I hope my telling of it made sense. And of course, I just want to thank you for hanging out and remembering Kia with me today. Now, considering everything I told you throughout this video, I want to revisit the question of the day, and that was this. These are them, because I have a couple. 1, do you think Andrea should have been found legally responsible for the crime she committed? Do you think she was insane at the time she committed this murder? Do you think it was planned? Do you think she should have gotten the death penalty? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below, because this case, I've got nothing. But anyways, guys, please don't forget to leave me a comment down below before you leave with what case you'd like to see me cover in the future. As you may or may not know, I have a long list of cases, and whenever you leave a suggestion, I put your case on the list with your name next to it, so if I do cover it, I can give you a shout out. I love looking into the cases you guys suggest, because they're often cases that I haven't heard of or cases that need more coverage, and I know you're filled with great ideas and great taste, otherwise you would not be here. If you haven't already, please don't forget to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, and I'd love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack to become one of us. One of us. And of course, if you want to hang out more consistently, all my social media is listed down below, along with a link to my membership and a link to my merch store. And now with all of that said, I just want to thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That is tight. You are tight. Please stay safe and be a better person than you were yesterday, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye.